Let me ask you something uncomfortable. If someone truly values you, why would they need you to chase them? Think about that. Because here's the truth most people don't want to hear. The chase isn't about love. It's about validation. And the moment you stop running, you find out who was walking with you and who was just enjoying being pursued. The desire to be chased is rarely about love. It's about affirmation. When someone wants you to chase them, what they are really asking for is proof. Proof that they matter, proof that they are wanted, proof that they still have influence over someone else's emotions. The chase becomes a scoreboard, not a bond. Each message you send first, each excuse you make for their distance, each extra step you take while they remain still adds a point to their ego. And egos, no matter how confident they appear, are never satisfied. They don't want closeness, they want confirmation. The moment you understand this, you stop confusing pursuit with passion. An ego thrives on imbalance. It needs someone reaching upward while it stands elevated. Chasing reinforces that imbalance because it positions one person as the prize and the other as the seeker. But real connection doesn't survive on hierarchy. It survives on equality. When two people genuinely care, effort moves in both directions naturally without strategy or pressure. The chase interrupts that flow. It turns something organic into something performative. Instead of asking, "How do we grow together?" it quietly asks, "How much more will you do to keep me interested?" And that question has nothing to do with love. The more you chase, the less the other person has to show up emotionally. Why would they? Your pursuit does the work for them. You become the engine, the planner, the emotional laborer, while they enjoy the ride. Over time, this dynamic erodes intimacy. You start feeling unseen, unheard, and unbalanced while they feel powerful without being present. The ego loves that arrangement because it demands very little while receiving a lot. But connection can't live there. Connection requires vulnerability, and ego avoids vulnerability at all costs. Chasing also trains the other person on how to treat you. Human behavior responds to patterns. If you consistently overextend, you teach them that distance is acceptable and effort is optional. Not because they are evil, but because behavior adapts to what it's rewarded for. When your chasing fills every silence, there is no incentive for them to step forward. The ego interprets your pursuit as permission, not as devotion. And the more permission you give to be undervalued, the more normalized it becomes. When you stop chasing, something uncomfortable but revealing happens. The noise fades. There are no constant messages, no reminders, no emotional cushioning. And in that silence, the ego is exposed. If what held them was attention rather than connection, they will feel the loss immediately. Not of you, but of the validation you provided. That's why withdrawal often triggers sudden interest. It's not always longing. Sometimes it's the ego realizing its supply has been cut off. This moment separates those who valued your presence from those who valued your pursuit. True connection doesn't panic when the chase ends. It doesn't need to be fed by constant proof. It stands steady because it was never built on ego in the first place. When someone values you for who you are, not for how hard you chase, they step forward without being asked. They contribute without being chased, and they don't confuse your stillness with disinterest. The ego may crave the chase, but connection recognizes confidence. And the moment you stop chasing, you stop feeding the ego and start making space for something real. Effort is the most honest language a person speaks. Words can be crafted. Promises can be dressed up. Excuses can sound convincing, but effort has no costume. It shows up plainly, consistently, and without needing to be demanded. When someone truly values you, you don't have to wonder where you stand. You don't have to chase clarity, chase reassurance, or chase time. Their actions quietly answer the questions you're afraid to ask. The problem begins when chasing replaces observation. When you chase, you blur the truth. You become so busy proving your worth that you stop measuring theirs. Chasing creates noise. It fills gaps that were meant to reveal intention. Every unanswered message you follow up on, every canceled plan you excuse, every silence you explain away delays the moment of truth. You tell yourself they're busy, confused, overwhelmed, not ready. But what you're really doing is protecting yourself from an answer you don't want to hear. Because if effort were present, you wouldn't need explanations. Effort doesn't require interpretation. It arrives clear and undeniable. And when it's missing, chasing only hides that absence. It doesn't fix it. When you stop chasing, effort is forced into the light. There's no buffer anymore, no emotional safety net, no one filling in the blanks. And that's when priorities reveal themselves without negotiation. If someone steps forward when you step back, it means they were always capable. They just didn't need to before. Your chasing made things comfortable. Your stillness makes effort necessary, and necessity reveals truth faster than any conversation ever could. Effort also exposes intention. Someone who wants you in their life will feel the shift immediately, not because they lost control, but because they lost connection. They'll ask questions. They'll check in. They'll close the distance without being prompted, not with grand gestures, but with consistency. Meanwhile, someone who only enjoyed your pursuit will feel inconvenienced, not concerned. Their interest fades because their priority was never you. It was the ease you provided. And that distinction is painful, but it's powerful. Many people mistake potential for priority. They see what someone could be rather than what they consistently show. Chasing keeps potential alive because it allows imagination to override reality. But effort kills illusion. It demands presence. It demands choice. When someone chooses you, you feel it not once, but repeatedly. And when they don't, no amount of chasing will turn absence into intention. You cannot love effort out of someone who hasn't decided to give it. Effort is also about timing, not excuses. People rearrange their lives for what matters. They adjust schedules, overcome inconvenience, and create space when something or someone is important. This doesn't mean perfection. It means intention. Someone who values you may struggle, but they won't disappear. They may stumble, but they won't leave you guessing. Chasing teaches them they don't need to show up fully because you'll carry the weight for both of you. Stillness teaches them that presence is required. When you remove yourself from chasing, you reclaim your power to evaluate instead of impress. You stop asking, how can I keep their attention? And start asking, are they showing up for me? That shift changes everything. You no longer compete with uncertainty. You observe behavior. And behavior always tells the truth. Effort reveals who makes room for you and who only keeps you around when it's convenient. Respect is not built through constant access. It's built through clear boundaries. When you are always available, always responsive, always accommodating, you unintentionally teach people that your time, energy, and presence are unlimited, and anything perceived as unlimited is rarely valued. Scarcity, on the other hand, introduces meaning. It signals that your life is full, your standards are intact, and your presence is intentional, not automatic. This is not about playing games or withholding affection. It's about understanding that respect grows where self-respect is visible. Availability without limits often comes from fear. The fear of being forgotten, replaced, or misunderstood. So you stay close, you stay reachable, you stay flexible, even when it costs you peace. But over time, this flexibility turns into self-erasure. Your needs become secondary. Your schedule bends. Your emotions wait. And while you may believe this devotion proves care, what it actually proves is tolerance. People don't rise to what you hope for. They adjust to what you allow. Constant availability tells them they don't need to try harder because you'll always be there regardless. Scarcity changes the conversation without a single word being spoken. When you don't immediately respond, when you don't drop everything to accommodate, when you don't rearrange your life to maintain proximity, something shifts. The other person becomes aware of you as a choice, not a guarantee. And choices invite respect. They prompt consideration. They encourage effort. Not because you're distant, but because you're grounded. You are present when it matters, not present at all times. That distinction is powerful. Respect also grows when people recognize that access to you is earned, not assumed. When you protect your time, you communicate value. When you protect your emotional energy, you communicate depth. Scarcity doesn't mean coldness, it means discernment. You are selective about where you invest because you understand that attention is currency. And when you stop spending it freely, people begin to notice its worth. They listen more closely. They show up more intentionally. They stop taking your presence for granted. There is a difference between being wanted and being needed. Availability feeds need. Scarcity invites desire. When someone knows they can reach you anytime, they rarely feel urgency. But when your presence is balanced, warm yet self-contained, it creates curiosity. It encourages pursuit that is respectful rather than entitled. This kind of pursuit is not driven by ego, it's driven by appreciation. And appreciation is the foundation of lasting respect. Many people confuse scarcity with manipulation, but true scarcity comes from alignment, not strategy. You're not withholding to provoke a reaction. You're living a full life that doesn't revolve around waiting. Your time is divided between purpose, growth, rest, and relationships that reciprocate. In that fullness, you are no longer over-available by default. You are available by choice, and that choice carries weight. When you stop being endlessly accessible, you create space for others to step forward. You allow them to show whether they value you enough to meet you where you are. Some will rise to that level. Others will drift away. But the ones who remain will respect you, not because you disappeared, but because you refuse to disappear into someone else's convenience. Every relationship has a balance, whether acknowledged or not. Power doesn't always show up as control or dominance. Often it appears as influence. Who waits, who initiates, who adjusts, and who decides. When you chase, that balance quietly tilts. You may not feel powerless, but you begin to give more than you receive, to lean forward while the other leans back. Over time, this shift becomes the unspoken structure of the connection. One person pursues, the other permits. And in that structure, equality slowly erodes. Chasing places the other person at the center of the dynamic. Their availability sets the tone. Their responses determine your mood. Their attention becomes something you work for rather than something that flows naturally. Without realizing it, you start organizing your emotional state around their behavior. This is where power slips away, not because you care, but because you are constantly reacting instead of choosing. The more you chase, the more the other person becomes the reference point for what happens next. Power imbalance doesn't require cruelty to exist. Often, the other person isn't intentionally withholding. They're simply responding to the role you've taken on. Human behavior adapts to patterns. If one person consistently initiates, follows up, and bridges emotional distance, the other learns they don't have to. The relationship becomes lopsided, not because one person demanded it, but because one person carried it. And carrying a connection alone eventually turns care into exhaustion. When you stop chasing, you don't create conflict, you create clarity. The dynamic resets. Suddenly, there is space, silence, a pause where effort must be voluntary rather than expected. This pause can feel uncomfortable, especially if you're used to being the emotional driver. But in that discomfort, the power begins to rebalance. You are no longer chasing reactions, you are observing choices. And observation is a position of strength. Reclaiming power doesn't mean withdrawing affection or becoming cold. It means refusing to overcompensate. It means allowing the other person the dignity to show up or not. When you hold your ground, you move from being someone who pursues to someone who evaluates. And evaluation shifts the entire energy of the relationship. You are no longer asking, how do I keep this going? You are asking, is this aligned with what I deserve? A balanced dynamic invites respect because it requires accountability. When effort must be mutual, both people become responsible for maintaining the connection. The other person can no longer coast on your enthusiasm alone. They must decide whether to meet you or lose access. That decision reveals their level of investment far more clearly than any promise ever could. Power, in its healthiest form, is self-possession. It's the ability to remain centered regardless of another person's actions. When you stop chasing, you return to yourself. Your emotions are no longer tethered to response times or mixed signals. You stand in your own rhythm. And in that steadiness, the dynamic either rises to meet you or collapses under the weight of its imbalance. Emotional maturity is not loud. It doesn't demand attention, chase reassurance, or panic in moments of uncertainty. It is quiet, steady, and grounded. One of its clearest signs is self-containment. The ability to hold your emotions, your worth, and your sense of identity without needing constant external validation. When you don't chase, you demonstrate this maturity without announcing it. You show that you can care deeply without losing yourself, that you can desire connection without depending on it to feel complete. People who crave being chased are often still learning this lesson. They confuse attention with attachment and pursuit with proof. But someone emotionally mature understands that real interest doesn't need to be hunted down. It reveals itself through consistency and choice. When you don't chase, you communicate that you are comfortable standing alone if necessary. That comfort is not indifference, it's confidence. And confidence signals that you are not looking for someone to fill a void. You are looking for someone to walk alongside you. Self-containment also means you don't outsource your emotional regulation. You don't rely on someone else's replies, moods, or availability to determine your peace. When communication slows, you don't spiral. When distance appears, you don't rush to close it at the cost of your dignity. Instead, you observe, reflect, and respond intentionally. This level of calm is rare because it requires trust in oneself. And rarity, whether people admit it or not, commands respect. When someone encounters this kind of emotional steadiness, it changes how they relate to you. They sense that you are not easily shaken, not easily manipulated, and not easily controlled by inconsistency. This doesn't intimidate emotionally mature people. It attracts them. They recognize it as safety. But for those who rely on attention to feel secure, your self-containment can feel unfamiliar, even unsettling. They may test it. They may pull back, expecting you to chase. And when you don't, they are forced to confront their own patterns. Emotional maturity also allows space for others to show who they are. When you don't chase, you're not rushing to fix discomfort or smooth over uncertainty. You allow situations to unfold naturally. This patience is not passive, it's discerning. You're giving the other person room to demonstrate initiative, vulnerability, and consistency. If they rise to that space, it strengthens the connection. If they don't, the truth reveals itself without drama or force. Self-containment protects your standards. It ensures that your desire for connection never outweighs your respect for yourself. You don't bend your values to maintain proximity. You don't tolerate ambiguity just to avoid being alone. Instead, you remain anchored in what you know you deserve. This anchoring is what makes your presence feel solid and safe to the right person, and unreachable to the wrong one. In a world where many people seek reassurance through pursuit, emotional maturity stands apart. It doesn't chase to prove worth. It doesn't cling to be chosen. It waits, grounded and clear, knowing that anything meant to stay will meet it where it stands. Chasing prolongs uncertainty. It stretches confusion into weeks, months, sometimes years, because it keeps hope alive even when evidence is thin. When you chase, you give situations more time than they deserve. You interpret mixed signals as potential, silence as mystery, and inconsistency as something that can be fixed with more effort. But stillness has a different effect. When you don't chase, you remove the padding that softens reality. What remains is truth, clear, direct, and often uncomfortable. Not chasing creates a natural filter. It separates interest from convenience, intention from habit. When you stop initiating, stop following up, stop compensating for distance, the other person must decide what to do with the space you've left. Some will step into it with purpose. Others will leave it empty. This response tells you everything you need to know. No confrontation required. No long conversations. Behavior becomes the answer. Stillness accelerates clarity because it invites action. Words alone can survive an ambiguity, action cannot. Someone who genuinely wants you will feel the absence of your pursuit and respond with effort, not excuses. They won't wait for perfect timing or the right moment. They will close the distance because connection matters to them. On the other hand, someone who only enjoyed being chased will interpret your stillness as a loss of supply, not a loss of connection. Their silence will grow because there is nothing left to consume. When you don't chase, you also stop bargaining with yourself. You no longer lower expectations to keep someone interested. You stop rewriting reality to avoid disappointment. This honesty with yourself is a form of self-respect. It allows you to see patterns as they are, not as you wish them to be. And once patterns are visible, decisions become easier. You move from emotional guessing to informed choice. Filtering truth faster doesn't mean you stop caring. It means you stop investing blindly. You conserve energy for situations that reciprocate. This selectiveness sharpens your intuition. You begin to trust what you observe instead of what you hope. The anxiety that once came from waiting and wondering is replaced by calm because you are no longer chasing outcomes. You are evaluating alignment. Stillness also reveals your own growth. When you don't chase, you notice how much space you used to give away. You recognize the strength it takes to pause instead of pursue. This restraint builds confidence. You learn that you can survive unanswered questions and unreciprocated effort. And that realization is freeing. You no longer need closure from another person. Clarity comes from your willingness to stop chasing. By choosing not to chase, you shorten the distance between uncertainty and truth. You stop romanticizing effort that never arrives and start honoring effort that does. In that space, what is real moves closer, and what isn't quietly falls away. So understand this clearly: chasing is not strength, and silence is not weakness. Strength is knowing when to step forward and when to stand still. Strength is allowing effort to speak louder than promises. When you stop chasing, you don't lose people who matter. You lose illusions that were draining you. You stop running in circles and start walking in truth. The right person will never require you to abandon your dignity to be chosen. They won't be motivated by how hard you pursue them, but by how solid you are in yourself. When you stand rooted in self-respect, you invite connection that is balanced, intentional, and real. And in that balance, you no longer chase validation. You attract mutual commitment.